thank you very much for showing up. As I said, I'm really passionate to present this topic today because I see it happening in every single project. So just want to start with a question as well, like how many of you have been managing a project or have been like part of a project where it went over budget, over timeline, or over scope? Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. So almost everyone. And I think this is really important that we just address it. And over the years, I have aggregated a lot of like strategies, and I think it's just valuable to share with the Drupal community. To myself, I'm Nina. I'm head of client operations and project manager in an agency called Ramsalt. We are based in Norway and mostly focused on Drupal. So let's start with the little bit of the boring part, but it's necessary to understand like the whole frame of the talk. So what actually is scope creep? Scope creep is the uncontrolled expansion of a project's requirements, features, deliverables beyond the initial approved scope. And I brought an illustration with me today. I think everybody of you has seen at least one time before. It's the project management triangle. And it basically shows like the constraints every project has. So it's like, first of all, the time frame, the cost in the sense of the budget, and also the scope. And it's really important to lay this out before the talk, because if you don't understand these like constraints here, it will be like hard to really understand why scope creep is such a big issue. So when scope changes, actually we have to adjust some other parts in this triangle. So when the scope expands, the only thing we will have to do is either to extend the time frame, get more budget, so extend the cost part, or the quality of the end product will suffer. And this is really important to keep this triangle in mind throughout the complete talk. So now that we know what it is, there's really like kind of predictable timeframes in a project where scope creep actually appears. And this is during the requirements gathering, because this is the phase where the project participants are just like finding out what they really want, because they are like first like start to think about it. Then we have after client feedback and review rounds, because if they see like a partial implementation, it often like raises questions, more ideas, or sometimes like reveals a lot of misunderstandings. Then we have near project completion. That's like a really interesting phase with all of like project stakeholders, because they're always like, yeah, it's nice what we have, but can we not squeeze this and this in? So this is a really, really critical time frame. And of course, when the project stakeholders are changing. So when the project team itself changes in the middle of a project, it's really challenging. Because when new project stakeholders come, they come with new ideas, with a new vision, with new understanding and new ideas, and that is really critical. And here below I just like illustrated the typical phases. So that you don't think like I'm making this up, I actually made an effort to do a little bit of research work. And since most of us are Drupal agencies, I focused a lot on like agency statistics now. But you actually see that more than 2/3 of all like agencies or like software products really struggle with scope creep. And that often like is really tightly connected to unclear client expectations, and also of us as vendors or project leaders to fail to address the scope creep with the clients. And as a result of all of that, we are most often really overserve the client in the end. So the most common causes for scope creep, they are really, really important to keep in mind. The most common one is really like unclear project goals and requirements from the really start. So when you are kind of getting into a project with a different mindset than what your client or other stakeholders or the developers are thinking what the end result will be, it's just set up to fail anyways. And also having like the common vision pointed out, the goals and the requirements is actually like different things. So you have to have the vision for it correct, you have to have the goals for reaching the vision correct, and you have to have the requirements which are broken down into features later on correct. Uncontrolled change requests, one of my most favorite topics. Once a client said to me that I said so often that he is making a change request to the original scope that he actually got annoyed by it. And that's how I knew, okay, I'm doing my job really, really well. So you have to have a control over it, and you have to like always treat it with the same patterns. And I will like later on fall back to how a change request process can look like. Then we have weak project workflows in itself. So when you as a project manager are kind of like inconsistent in what you are communicating, how clients can request features, it's also set up to fail quite spectacular. Inadequate communication, what do I mean by that? All kind of like communication which can go wrong. It's like miscommunication, no communication, also communication gaps between developers, so technical people and non-technical people. Conflict avoidance, that's actually like in reality one of the most common ones if you ask me, especially in an agency environment, because you just want, you don't dare to say no to the clients, and then you really want to please them, you want to keep their satisfaction level high, and this conflict avoidance really ends up in a like big chance for scope creep. And then we have, last but not least, maybe it does not happen that often, but also the market around us, like especially now with AI, and legal frameworks can change. So when you started a project a year ago, there might now be some new legal legislations we have to take care about. Then I actually thought to myself, yeah, it all sounds like nice and good, but how do we do this in reality? And I think a lot of us have seen it that the clients are treating the budget in a really waterfall way. So they said like the budget is fixed, but we still want to have the flexibility of adjusting our features. And I thought about like, should we actually limit this kind of change which is happening in the projects? And my answer to that is no, we shouldn't. Because I think every software project, especially when the clients or the stakeholders are forming an understanding and are kind of like growing with the task of the project and the duration, it's really, really important to have change happening, and actually the end products, in my experience, are way better when we do let them do these change requests to like certain features. It all has to be controlled, it all has to be within a frame, but the problem is not the change in itself, but I think the uncontrolled change when it happens. And I have kind of tried to list at least a couple of success factors. So how can we work agile and manage scope creep somehow? So I came up with those like 4 pillars here. So first of all, robust change management processes. And you hear me saying this probably like 10 times over the presentation duration, but it's really, really, really important. Transparent communication, I think that's in nowadays like collaboration between agencies, project managers, really important. You have to have strong negotiation skills. I underestimated this quite a bit, but the clients will sometimes be really, really consistent on what they want, and then you have to like find some kind of compromise and really try to focus on user needs, because often like clients or project participants can be really like stuck on their opinion and forgetting the end user of the product. In our case, like mostly like the Drupal websites. So if you keep those factors in mind a little bit with all in combination what I'm going to tell you next, then I think you're really well set up to still work agile, accept change, but do it in a good manner. So, scope creep management toolkit. I had first in my talk description, I had prevention toolkit, but then after like diving deeper into it and like get my own thinking of it, it's actually not that we should prevent it, but we need to like manage it properly. So, first, foremost, most important, can't stress it more than enough, awareness is key. So you have to know every single project detail which there is. So if you're working together with a sales team, make sure the handover is completed, look at the tender documents, the original ones, look at the contracts you have been setting up, look at the industry, the target group of the website, like just try that you as the project manager really have the best understanding of the project you can have. And also make sure your team has the same understanding. Because it's nice if I'm a project manager on top of things, but the developers also need to have an understanding to make the right decisions. And that's really important and underestimated, I think. That there's one person in a project who knows everything and the rest is just handling. And to really be strong as a team, I think we have to have all the same understanding about the target audience, about the vision, that we can make good informed decisions together and consult each other in the team. Like the developers tell me, okay, there's a better way of doing this. Can we try this out? Is this within the budget, within the time frame, etc.? Then monitor the project process at all times. Clients can never be left alone, I can tell you. So, just halftime.
Ladies and gentlemen, do not miss the wrap-up of the event at 6 o'clock in the auditorium. This is the time to share the last moment all together.
And have some drinks, I guess. Okay. So yeah, monitor the project process at all times, and especially in very stressful project phases. So when the client often comes like, I have a quick question, or I have like a small remark, that's like really the warning signs. When you do get emails like this, it needs to ring in your head and saying, okay, now scope creep is about to happen. Then early alignment on scope, do it as early as possible. Run like a comprehensive kickoff workshop in the beginning. I just attended a different call who said the complete opposite and said like grow with the task and don't do the kickoff workshop. But I think there's just no right or wrong answer to, like, depending on what your projects are, of course. Then in this kickoff workshop, create a shared vision of the project goals and really make sure everybody understands it. That's really important. Like everybody, non-technical people, technical people, everybody needs to be on the same page about this. And I'm not talking that we like talk about in detail about the features, how they're going to look, how they're going to work. It's just about the vision of the goal and what is the end result. And then when you have like the kind of understanding, best case scenario, you have a scope document, which the client had in some kind of tender documents before, or the project team has thought about it. Take that on hand as well and align on the priorities. Bring this priority talk in as early as possible, because that makes them think about, okay, what do we really want, what is really important, and then later on it will give you a really, really good position when scope creep happens and you have to like compromise on something. To have had this priority talk prior really, really helps finding a fast solution, what we need in day-to-day business. Talk about the expectations. I always talk about all kinds of expectations. Expectations of the end product, expectations about communication, like how do you want to communicate, how often do you want to be updated, like all kinds of expectations, like on a personal level, but also on a professional level. And most important, get it signed off, because it's really high likelihood that there is changes between the original tender document or the scoping document, if there was any, and what you have been working on after the workshop. So try to get that signed off, because it adds a lot of accountability. So then later on you can tell the clients, but this is what we have agreed on. And then it's really, really hard to circle back if you have good arguments. Then introduce strict project processes. No, I repeat myself, but change management process. And in the next slide I will show you how a potential change management process can look like. And this I can't stress more than enough. Please do not accept verbal change requests or feedback. This is the worst thing you can do, because if you're loose in some of the meetings, and if it's even just a color change on the footer, don't accept it. Like, get it written, get it in the change management procedure you have set up, because otherwise this is already like kind of stepping over the boundaries you have set as a project manager and causes a lot of inconsistency. And then the clients at a certain point in the project, depending on how big it is, don't know how they should do certain stuff anymore. And then it all derails. And write meeting notes. It's super easy nowadays to find like good tools doing that for you, summarizing it for you, and especially like if there has been any major decisions been made in the meetings, they also need to be documented. On the right side here, I know it's a little bit small, but I have like kept it like this on purpose. You don't need to read all the details, but this is a feature request form I'm using with one of my clients, and it actually like lets them think about their feature request early on, and I also in this form ask about the priority of this feature. This client particularly, this website is already maintenance stage, but it's a rather big site, so we have continuous development going on, and they have to prioritize it compared to other functionalities. And I often see that if they think about the details in like prior for submitting the task to me, it really helps them themselves to sometimes think like, is this really necessary? Does this make sense? Is it really like a good business case for me? Does it bring any value? So one of my clients actually said that sometimes he starts to fill the form out and then cancels it because he answered the question himself. And that's like the best case scenario. attached change management process. It's really simply kept, and of course all of us are using different project management tools and different like internal processes, but the awareness part is really, really important. So once you have identified that it is actually scope creep and that you can only do if you know all project details very much in detail, then you can evaluate the impact. And this is where we kind of like circle back to the project management triangle. So you have identified, okay, there's like scope creep, there's a change request. What impact does it have on my budget, on my timeline, on the quality of the website? And that altogether you're discussing with your project team members, with the clients, because only when you have that transparent communication going on, you can reach a common understanding. So I always tell the clients, if you request this, there is something else which needs to happen. And then together, if you decide to approve or reject that, in that case, the circle goes, if you have approved it, you implement the change, you monitor the results, and then you, what is really important, document it, because I often had like clients circling back to me in the invoice like saying, what are these hours? And I was like, yeah, that's the feature you wanted in addition. So it's really, really good to have that documented and connected with all the decisions that have been made. Really, this is like a kind of more comes to like emotional intelligence and communication skills, but avoid misunderstandings at all costs. And I really like, no matter how difficult my clients were, the open and transparent communication, also pointing out when there has been issues in the project, always worked best. And also the projects were most successful in the ones where we have regular status meetings. So where we keep in touch, where we show the progress, where we involve them, and that makes them like own the solutions and the features more. So this is a really, really like good way also, I'm kind of like skipping between the points here, but to involve the client like early in testing the functionalities to avoid misunderstandings, especially like big functionalities. And what I have learned as the master skill is to make wireframes and prototypes. Because for complex features, it's really hard for the clients to grasp. And if you just make a wireframe, a really simple one with this is an image, there's like a title, the clients will like see this, and based on like visuals, it's easier for them to give feedback rather than if you have written down like a task description. So that really like changed the game for me, especially for the big features, the big complex functionalities. Understand the team dynamics. This is like, I think, the most difficult one here to realize if you do not have a lot of experience yet. But you have to understand who makes the decisions, who is the quiet one but is the most knowledgeable one, who is best connected with the management. So just understand this kind of like dynamics which is happening in the background on your side but also on the client side. And yeah, speak up if you disagree, but please with good reasoning and good backup. So if you disagree with the client, circle back to your communication, circle back to the documentation, and then always do it with like good reasoning. So to wrap up, I think that managing scope creep is a little bit of like the art of saying no without actually saying it, or like try to compromise on something. And the 4 main strategies I have evolved, and that's like now the realistic use cases, are those 4. So what can you do when scope creep happens or when a change request comes in? You can do the alternative offer. So you can always say, okay, we can add this, but based on the priorities we have been discussing, like what else do you want to adjust? Like, should we adjust the timeline? Do you have more budget you can give us? And within these constraints, like find what is the alternative. Then the priority shift. This is actually like when you do put it in, but you either put something else completely out of the backlog, or you, for example, like these two, like the alternative offer and the priority shift, often in reality can play together. So you can say, okay, we deprioritize something else and we adjust the timeline, and we adjust the budget. Then we have the future release strategy. So this is one which I use the most often because as an agency it's the most profitable as well. So we finish up the core functionality, put all the creative ideas, like give them credit, really make the client like contribute, but then say, okay, we will wrap up or circle back to these features after we have done the core functionality, core website. And the data-driven approach, and then I have to cancel because I'm already a little bit over time.
1 minute to book it.
Yeah. That's the conclusion. So the data-driven approach, if you have statistics available, it's always a good point to back up your assumptions about the product with some statistics, because that's hard to argue against. Thank you for your time.
We don't have time for questions.
I'm so sorry, but if you have questions, please connect on LinkedIn. You can always find me and will answer every single question. I was happy to connect, and if you share your experiences with me. Thank you.